I want to start off this video by saying that I am genuinely grateful for a lot of the changes that came in update 1.26. I think a lot of the changes to the maps, the consumables, and some aspects of Crew 2.0 were very healthy for the game's evolution. However, there are some other things that this update has brought that have shed light on a lot of the existing problems that we've already had and highlighted some new problems that we need to talk about. So today I'm going to be giving some constructive feedback because part of the reason why this update was genuinely good was because Wargaming listened to our feedback. And I genuinely think that the topic that I'm going to talk about today is another area where they can once again listen. So let's get right into it. Part of what makes World of Tanks unique is that each vehicle has its own identity and its own niche. However, as World of Tanks has evolved, one of the things that I have noticed has been the breaking down and the blurring of different class roles. If you've been playing long enough, you'll remember when heavy tanks actually used to be heavy tanks and were slow. But now, many are just as fast as medium tanks, if not faster. And one of the things you guys have heard me talk about quite a lot is how good medium tanks are at spotting. Essentially, they do the same roles as light tanks, but with better firepower. And this diminishment of class roles in favor for versatility and firepower has been perfectly highlighted by the release of the new Czech light tanks. And based off of what I've been saying, you might also think that this same trend benefits the Czech, but it actually shows us a perfect example of why the trade-off of class specialization for more versatility is an extremely detrimental trade, especially for light tanks. You see, part of the cost of being a highly versatile tank is the fact that you don't specialize in any one thing. So when the Czech light tanks were developed with poor view range, poor speed, and poor camo, in favor of having a gun that could delete an FV with HE shells, it means that it cannot compete against pure scouts such as the EBR-105 or the Manticore or anything that just has a little bit better view range and camo than this thing. And don't get me wrong, I would much rather have the Czech light tanks be a little bit underpowered on release than be overpowered and broken and have to wait weeks for Wargaming to actually rebalance it. However, the unfortunate result of having these Czech light tanks be so underpowered on release is the fact that they are such bad light tanks that they create imbalances in the matchmaker such that it actually messes up the game for all of us. And this is something that I'm going to talk about in a couple moments here. And while this isn't necessarily a problem right now because there are so many of these Czech light tanks in the matchmaker, the release of these tanks begs the question, where do these tanks actually fit in? Because when they're required to face up against actual light tanks, they don't have the speed, the camo, or the spotting capabilities to do their job as a spotter role. But at the same time, their damage dealing capabilities are not anywhere near as good as a medium tank, which mind you, the two medium tanks that I'm going to highlight in this video are just as good, if not better spotters than the new Czech light tanks. And I genuinely wish I could say that this was a problem specific to the Czech light tanks. But there are other lines such as the Sheridan line and the Chinese lights that also suffer from these same exact problems. Now, these tanks wouldn't have to suffer as much if we had a matchmaker that identified these different types of light tanks and then matched them up against one another in an equal ratio. Some light tanks are pure spotters, other ones are wheeled vehicles, and then you have this other subgroup that doesn't actually exist that is versatile lights that have a damage dealing capability as well as the ability to spot. And the unfortunate result of a system that doesn't have this is mismatches in a matchmaker where we have one team having a Manticore and the other one having a Czech on maps like Prokhorovka or Malinovka. We already know the predetermined outcome as soon as we load into the battle screen. Is it any surprise that the Manticore is going to clean the floor against a Czech? No. And now, I can already hear some of you guys saying, how often do you really get Malinovka or Prokhorovka? Well, to be honest, there's about at least 8 maps where it actually matters. But even when we go to the maps where it doesn't matter, we run into the opposite problem. Why be in a light tank whose main role is to deal damage when you could be in something like the newly buffed Batchat 25T or the K91? Now listen, I totally get the appeal of the new Czech tank line. What other tanks can shred lightly armored tanks so easily and so fast? But let's also not forget that in recent history, Wargaming has been able to balance tanks such that they are not an active detriment when they're facing something of the same class on the enemy team and are actually fun and balanced at the same time. I believe the Japanese tank destroyers are perfect examples of this. Wargaming absolutely can balance things in this way. And speaking of balancing, I want to get back to the Batchat and the K91. Both of these tanks are actually better scouts than the newly released Tessak. How this is possible, I don't know. And while these tanks absolutely deserve their buffs, the fact that they are already better light tanks as medium tanks than the newly released Tessak is very indicative that light tanks as a class have lost their identity. And on top of that, the buffs only go to widen the gap between mediums and light tanks so as to push light tanks even further into irrelevancy. And while there are a lot of solutions towards shortening this gap, such as reworking equipment to be less effective on certain classes and more effective on others, I believe that Crew 2.0 also presented an opportunity to make light tanks unique again. And this is actually something that another fellow World of Tanks YouTuber brought up, and I really like the idea, because essentially we could have had class-specific perks that would be exclusive to certain classes, or we could have had perks that work at varying degrees depending on your classes, meaning that light tanks would have the best of recon and situational awareness, while heavy tanks and medium tanks get the downgraded version of this and less buffs to their V range. Alternatively, with class-specific perks, it would just mean that lights are the only class to get situational awareness and recon, while the other ones don't, and vice versa, meaning that light tanks would also have some skills unavailable to them that are only available to medium tanks or heavy tanks. The point being is that view range and spotting capabilities should be in the hands of light tanks primarily, and everybody else should come after for that. Just in the same way that brawling capabilities should be in the hands of heavy tanks and firepower-oriented skills should be in the hands of medium tanks. And this is all done in mind so that each class actually has its own strengths and weaknesses, because as of now, everything is just consolidated. The new crew system, while it makes picking the perks harder than it has ever been, there are still some perks that everybody is taking regardless of their classes. And this was the same problem that we had on the old crew system, is that everybody is just taking the same mandatory perks that give them all the same amount of buffs so that they can have the most versatile playstyle. So I know all this is a lot to take in, and obviously our goal is to preserve the identity of each class. And I think that by reworking some skills, and or removing some view range from certain classes, or by reworking certain equipment's availability or effectiveness on different classes, we can actually address this problem. And I would love to hear your guys' feedback on this issue. What do you think that could be done in order to restore the uniqueness of each class? Let me know your guys' ideas and what you think of these ones in the comment section. But one of the things that I really want to return to is the diminishing uniqueness of light tanks, mainly because I think they face the most amount of challenges as opposed to any other class in the game. So if you want to see me address all of these challenges and propose solutions that could genuinely help the experience of light tanks in our game, then click this video that is available right here, and this is going to be part 1 of my update 1.26 rant. The next one is going to be returning to the topic once again of artillery. Stay tuned. I'll see you next time.